I'm Alex. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a freelance developer slash designer slash educator slash I don't know, basically if it's sort of tech related, you can pay me and I'll probably give it a go. Anyway, and I'm some hats on the internet, and today I'm going to be talking about GraphQL, specifically an introduction to GraphQL. What even is it? I don't know. So according to Facebook, who would probably know because they invented it, it's a query language for APIs, which I don't know. Those sure are some words, I guess. So I don't really know what that means. So I like to think of it as a way of talking to some external thing, which I guess is what the API bit is. It's normally when you're using an API, you're talking to some external thing from your app or website or whatever it is, and maybe you want to I don't know, bring in some external data or your own data or whatever it is, but it's not in the device or app at the moment. You need to get it from somewhere. And GraphQL is a language, a way of asking for that stuff and getting it back, and also asking for it to do certain things, make updates, that sort of thing. So it kind of divides into two main sort of categories. You have your reading stuff type of thing. So it's asking questions of whatever remote thing you're integrating it with. Can I have all the comments for this post or whatever it is? And you also have the sort of other side of that, which is performing updates, writing data, creating new comments or likes. Or thanks, Cara. And this is probably something that when people come across this, we generally, when we're working with data, we're either consuming it and doing stuff with it, or we're telling it to do stuff. Can you change in this way? Whatever. That's a thing, right? Okay, cool. Not just me. Great. Has anyone here had to play with GraphQL before? Yeah, some people. Awesome, awesome. What about who's maybe is anyone here using it at work? Some people, yay. Cool. So typically, when we got this whole thing going on of we got our app, it's a browser, it's a mobile app maybe, I don't know. And we want to get some data into it. We have this idea of client and server, which is everyone more or less familiar with client server? You got one, you got the other one. They talk, great pals. It's real nice. Anyway. So the place that sort of GraphQL sits in this whole thing is it's the way that the client can ask a question to the server. So let's say we're building some sort of egg app. The client might want to ask how many eggs are available in whatever our external data store thing is, and it'll use GraphQL to ask that question. So this is a little GraphQL query. We're saying it's a query. We for all of the eggs, what's the total count of them that we have? And the server's going to take that. It's going to look at the GraphQL syntax and read and understand it. And then it's going to do whatever it needs to do to answer that question. So in this case, it's probably going to open up the fridge and look at the eggs, count them, and everything's great. I guess, I don't know, I suppose egg management isn't a super common use case for it, but I don't know, I feel I don't know how many eggs I have in my fridge right now. Where's my VC money? So anyway, once the server has figured out what the answer to this question is, it's going to make a response, which is just plain old happy JSON data. Jason is always happy. I didn't know if you were aware of that. Sends it back to our client, and now we know we can like update our UI, or maybe if we're using something like React with like one of the cool GraphQL clients, our UI will just update automatically, which is kind of cool. And one of the most important things about GraphQL is that these two things, your query and your response, the data that you get back, kind of look the same. Like, does everyone notice how these sort of have like query and data are like different, but what's inside those is sort of the exact same sort of like structure. So this is like one of the main like points of GraphQL. But anyway, the whole sort of purpose of it is to do this like fetching and updating of server-side data from some sort of client app. And it tries to do that in a way that's like pretty efficient, and also in a way that's like super like nice and consistent all the way across your API. So how do we actually like maybe get started with like creating a GraphQL API or like using GraphQL? So any GraphQL service is made out of 3 main bits. There's the schema, then queries, and mutations. So the schema is a description of all of the data that's available. So it lists like a bunch of types. So maybe you're like, maybe the eggs that we had from before are actually like penguin eggs. I don't know. And like we have like a certain bit of information about a penguin. And in our schema, we can describe the type of a penguin. We have some sort of like unique identifier, maybe. Penguins have like probably some like really cute names, and like an age. Age is good. Sort of neutral on ages, actually. Anyway, so just as another example, maybe our penguins like love apples, and we might have like an apple type as well with some different properties. This is the syntax that you would use if you were writing a GraphQL server to like define all of the types and like shapes of everything. Then the graph name in GraphQL kind of comes from the relationships between these things. Like we have our penguins, we've got our apples. The penguins really want to like have some apples, but we have no way of like relating those two things together. And that's where like the relationships in GraphQL sort of come into things. And it's sort of where it gets its name as well. Once you start like connecting these things together, you end up with this like whole giant graph of penguins and apples, or maybe like whatever your like clearly inferior app is, like stuff like connecting, which is pretty cool. And GraphQL makes it like very easy to sort of go from here and like find the other things that are like related to whatever you're looking at the time. So if we take our two type definitions from before, our penguin and our apple, it's really easy in GraphQL to add a relationship between the two, to say that maybe a penguin has a bunch of apples, and an apple, I guess these penguins maybe like they live on some sort of apple commune now. I don't know. I guess if there's owners, it wouldn't be a commune. Anyway, these clearly, like, I guess they have like a system of like barter. So we've got like you know this like square bracket syntax to indicate that like one penguin can have some sort of can have like a lot of apples, which is good probably for the penguin. And an apple can either have an older penguin and a grower penguin, but no other penguins than that. How's that sound? So we're like describing this like shape of the data that's like available to us in our app. You know, obviously this would be like specific to your thing that you're building. Maybe you'd have like a user and comments and like documents and photos or something. I guess it depends on what you're building. So queries are the second part, and queries are how we actually get stuff from our GraphQL server. If we think back to before when we had that like distinction of like the two different things that GraphQL is for, the reading and writing. Queries are all the reading side of things. So ideally, a query would like never change any of the like data in your service. It's a little bit like if you're doing REST, like a GET request. So we would describe in our query exactly what we want. So we're asking for a penguin, and then giving penguin some like extra arguments. So we're saying name Liz, a penguin called Liz. Liz, I think, is not the best name for a penguin that I could have come up with. I will be accepting better penguin name suggestions. Anyway, so we're asking for like a penguin called Liz, and we're asking for the ID and name of that penguin back from the server. And sure enough, the server is going to do that. It's going to look at our query and give us back some data that matches that. And if we change our query, say we add in age, we're asking for a little bit more data now, then the response changes in the same way. We got like a really old penguin. Which is like really, really powerful. It means that if you're building like a client application, you can ask for exactly the right data that you want and know that you're not going to get back any more or any less than exactly what you need, which is super great. So we can do the same thing. We could ask for apples, although we have to be a little bit more specific here because apples aren't just a simple primitive data type like a number or a string. We have to say exactly what we want from the apple. So maybe here we're interested in the size and color of them. And then our API response is going to change to match the shape of the query. So here we've got back an array of apples, each with a size and a color. And what this means, because this like relationship structure is like the same everywhere, it means your API is like super, super consistent all the way across like every single part of it, because everything comes back to those types. So yeah, with GraphQL, you get exactly what you ask for, no more and no less, which I think is pretty cool. I don't know. Mutations are like the third part of GraphQL. And this sort of, so mutations is a word that like people, like JavaScript people really like to use the word mutations. Maybe it's not just JavaScript people, maybe it's programmers in general. I really don't like the word mutations because I always hear it and I'm like, oh, great, I'm like in the X-Men now. There's like probably some sort of weird, like maybe there's some like weird animals changing into other animals, or like that like really bad film with the aliens and the shampoo. I don't know. So mutations doesn't mean like some sort of weird like genetic like stuff going on in a spooky way thing. It just means changing data, making a bit of data be different to what it was before. And the typical like 3 ways that people might have heard of are like create, update, and delete. Have people come across these things before? They kind of fit in with that like query side, the reads, to be the whole like CRUD thing. People like talking about CRUD sometimes. There's some nodding, that's encouraging, okay. So that's all mutation means. It just means changing data. So here we have another example of a mutation. So we might want to like create an apple, and here in the parenthesis next to create apple, I need like a big stick or something, I guess, for pointing. We're like giving it a little bit of information. So we're saying create an apple with size 13. Now we're including ID, size, and color inside that mutation, but they're not actually going to have any effect on what gets created, what happens. They're just there, that ID, size, and color, to say this is the information that I want back after you've like made these changes. So all of the mutations in GraphQL kind of have like a little query in them as well. So if we look back on the other side here, we've got our create apple response, and we can see that the size has been set to 13 as we passed it in there. And we've got back our ID and color as well because we asked for those. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. Demo. I hope it doesn't go horribly wrong. So, who here's come across GitHub? It's like a weird website. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. So GitHub has this really cool GraphQL API that you can use for like playing around, like exploring all of GitHub's data. But it's also a really great example of like GraphQL and how it works. So here we have a little GraphQL query that I can run and get the response back for my current GitHub account. And I can go in and add some more information here, like get my email. There we go. That all works. And I can query for those like relationships on that big graph of information that GitHub has. So maybe I'd look for my like starred repositories and get like the last 3. We have to do this nodes things for like reasons. And maybe we get like the name and owner of those repositories. So here's like some random stuff I've apparent. Oh, the owner is like an ID. That's a bit rubbish. Do we get name? Login. Okay, that seems cool. So like, here are some repositories that I've been starring on GitHub, which is kind of cool. I really recommend you have a go with the GitHub GraphQL API. The other thing it has is this awesome docs section, where you can go through and explore all of the different types of query and mutation that you can run on GitHub, and it's incredible. And I think the coolest part of this is this graphical tool that they've embedded in their website will work with any GraphQL API. GitHub hasn't done anything to like create this like interactive documentation thing. It's just there because the GraphQL schema has all of this information associated with it, and this interface is just exposing it to us as developers in kind of a friendly way. So that's pretty cool. Just as a quick example of a mutation, I've got the GraphQL repository open here, and as you can see, I have not starred it currently. I know. But I have this little example of a GraphQL mutation here. So the mutation is add star, and I'm giving it an input with a starable ID, which is this like big, long, complicated ID thingy. And I'm just asking for like whatever the ID of what I starred is back. So if I run this now and switch back to here and reload the page, I've started the repo. Yay! It works. What a relief. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about GraphQL and REST. It was mentioned a bit earlier on, but like how GraphQL sort of compares to REST and where it like fits in with like the other ways that you might want to like communicate with an API. So a lot of people on the internet like to think that like GraphQL is some sort of like REST killer, like that they get like GraphQL is just going to replace REST, and REST is going to go far away and like live in a igloo. Got a real Arctic theme going on. But I don't really think that's true. I think that actually GraphQL and REST kind of have like some different strengths and can complement each other quite well. I think they do kind of go quite well together, and yeah, it's lovely. In all of the projects where I've used GraphQL, we've had a few. Okay, so this is where like the REST thing gets a little bit tenuous. We've had a few like just other HTTP endpoints scattered around doing bits and pieces, which isn't really what REST is, but like in my experience of working literally anywhere, it's kind of how people do REST. They just have, anyway. But yeah, they kind of do work quite well together, and I found that when I've been using GraphQL, like it's been great for like all of the sort of normal routine like reading and writing of data. But then like there'll be some weird like extra thing that needs to integrate with something else, or like sometimes for like login or authentication, just falling back to like a normal like RESTful or like other random HTTP endpoint is like kind of a perfectly okay thing to do as well. So they kind of work quite well together. But I think GraphQL definitely has like a bunch of benefits. One of the most important ones is this thing about getting exactly what you ask for in a single query. I've worked on and used a lot of RESTful apps where if you have 3 different components on your page, maybe you have an article, a like user profile, and a comment section on your page, that turns into 3 different API requests when you load your page, which is going to slow things down. It's going to maybe mean that like some stuff loads and the rest doesn't or whatever. It's generally like not an ideal experience. It's also kind of can be like harder to coordinate as like a developer. Whereas with GraphQL, you typically would have your 3 components on the page and have that get squished into one single query that would get just the data that's needed for that page. No extras, no like, or having to make like repeated requests to get like the same amount of data. Everything gets squished into one request. So a little bit like more of like a comparison, I guess. GraphQL generally, I think like the benefits are, that single request thing. It's also like, I find like a lot more consistent in your API. You can get that level of consistency with REST, but in my experience, it takes a lot more work than it does with GraphQL. One area where REST does tend to do better is with caching. Generally, because you have like those more granular requests being made, you can cache those requests on an individual basis. And the browser or whatever you're using will probably do that automatically. Whereas with GraphQL, generally we have to use like, if we want that level of caching, we need like a smart like GraphQL caching library. But the good news is there's like tons of them out there. Well, there's like 2 that are any good, but that's like almost tons. So it's fine. I find that the tooling for GraphQL is really amazing as well. Although it's a relatively like new thing, it has like some really, really great tools. And everything is sort of standardized. Whereas with REST, there are some awesome tools out there, but they don't fit together in a way that is sort of as satisfying. Also, GraphQL is shinier. So getting started, you can use GraphQL in basically any language, including these ones. Node is good. I like that. And there's a bunch of like awesome tools out there as well that work well with Node. GraphQL is really neat. It's like a great GraphQL prototyping tool. And if you're like into databases and enjoy writing SQL because you're like weird like me, then PostgreSQL is a really neat tool that will create a GraphQL API from your Postgres database, and it's like super awesome. On the client side, typically like the most popular two are Apollo and Relay. Apollo is really cool. It's made by the same people who make No, it's not. It's made by the same people who make Meteor, which they used to be a thing but isn't as cool now. Apollo is like the new cool thing that they're doing. And that will work with like vanilla JS, like React, Angular, like all of them. Relay is Facebook's one, which is a lot more opinionated, but it kind of only works with React. So just to quickly sum up, it's a query language for APIs. What does that mean? It's just like a thing for talking to things that are external to your app in some way. It's for efficiently fetching and updating data. And it's made up of a schema, a bunch of queries, and a bunch of mutations. So you get exactly the data that you need with just a single request, which is cool. And yeah, if you want to get started, I would recommend having a go with graph.cool and Apollo, because they're pretty neat. Here's like a bunch of resources, which I'm not going to go through because I don't want to. But my slides are online, so that's cool. So anyway, this is me. If you follow me on Twitter, I would like that. I'm trying to like be like I already got like a lot more followers than Kay, but like she's been catching up, and I want to get to 1,000 by the end of the year. So this is my current like goal. So you should follow me on the internet because I want you to. Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks.